Good morning. I hope you're caffeinated. If you're not, let's just say right now, at any time that if you still need caffeine or food or whatever, just get up. I'm not going to think it's rude. I'm going to think that's you taking care of something very basic. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for all coming out early on a Monday morning. I'm going to give you 1 hour of the greatest hits of why leaders really need to focus on moving from managing homelessness to ending homelessness, and provide you some really kind of probably deep and provocative thoughts related to that, challenge the current way in which it's looked at, and truly focus on what it would mean for Northern Colorado to really wrap its arms around this solution. So we're going to talk about investing in change and spending on impact, and what we really need from homeless service providers, from our leaders within our community to actually achieve that aim. So you heard little bits about me. All I can say is that you can also go to orgcode.com and learn more. So solution-focused engagement begins with handling the truth. So we're going to see if you can really handle the truth to get started. And the reason why I like to position things as, really handling the truth is that there's a ton of mythology related to homelessness. And it is probably one of the only industries where we confuse a big heart with a big brain. That somehow if you care, you're qualified. And it's probably one of the only parts of our society where we gather input from a variety or diverse range of people and we treat it as equal. What do I really mean by that? Imagine if we were building a bridge. If we were building a bridge, we would trust structural engineers to be able to tell us what type of bridges we could build with which types of materials that would carry which loads. And that would be irrefutable. So when we have public commentary, it would usually be related to things like, well, what color do we want the bridge to be? What do we want to name the bridge? But not, is that load right? When it comes to complex social issues, you take a whole bunch of people who have absolutely zero training and allow them to make decisions in terms of how other people are going to live their life. And what tends to happen over time is instead of providing a social service, you have an entire community that tries to exercise social control. Change who you are so that I can give you what you need. And most of those myths just aren't true. So I did a little research related to Colorado, related to the nation. Some of these are things that I go back to over and over again. But let's look at what the root of the issue is. All right. So there are about 45 million Americans living in economic poverty. On any given day, less than 600,000 will experience homelessness. So right off the bat, let's acknowledge that homelessness is a remarkably rare event. Almost nobody who is economically poor will ever be homeless in their life. So most poor people are not homeless. And so it debunks this idea that I have to increase your income to get you out of homelessness, because what I really need to do is how to help you achieve housing while being poor, not solve your poverty. So homeless programs solve homelessness. They do not solve poverty. Different policy instruments, different approaches, different periods of time. So somehow the other 44.5 million figure it out every single day and are not homeless. Okay. Of the 5.5 million people in Colorado, just over 11% live in poverty, and only about 11,000 are homeless on any given day. So even if we take it from the national level to the state level, most poor people in Colorado aren't going to be homeless. Most poor people in Colorado are going to be, and we're talking about over 500,000 people, if you're doing the math, are not going to be in a position of homelessness. So it is possible to be poor and be housed in Colorado. I'm not saying it's ideal. I'm not saying I want to be in that position. But it is entirely possible. And if we look at the availability of affordable housing, about 61,000 affordable housing units across the state. Less than 15,000 of these are Section 8. So most people who are really poor, not only are they housed, they're most likely to be housed in the private market. Almost none of them get a subsidy. Now, it might be great if there was more subsidies. And it might be great if there's more affordable housing. But I can tell you right now that no community has ever built its way out of homelessness. You have to figure out how do we leverage the existing assets that we have, and it turns out you have about 500,000 experts across the state who you could tap into to tell you how they do this every single day and not need any services. So if it's not about income, what is homelessness really about? Okay. If we were to look at people who rely on SSI or SSDI, could they really afford housing technically on paper in the state? No. If you look at the median gross rent and you look at how much a person gets on SSI, those two things are nowhere close to each other. And yet I can tell you most people on SSI are not homeless. Okay. What about those on minimum wage? Now, just looking at gross, I would bring in about $14.88 a month. That would mean that 2/3 of their income has to go towards their housing. Now, that's not ideal, but it's also a huge myth when people say, oh, we got tons of people who are one paycheck away from being homeless. Not true. Not true at all. You have lots of people who are trying to get by from paycheck to paycheck. The good news is almost none of them will be homeless. Okay. So if it's not about the economics, it must be those darn decisions people make in their life to drink and use drugs or to have a mental illness. Am I right? Huh? So just by show of hands, how many of you have had one or more drinks of alcohol in the last 90 days? Okay, some of you put up 2 hands. That's encouraging. Now, if we were to follow the way in which we look at most homeless service programs and housing programs, it says that sobriety is a precondition of housing success. But look at you. Clearly, you don't deserve to be housed. If you want to leave your keys and address on the way out, that'd be great. Been looking for property in Northern California. We say that there's some people who, like those people living as a sex offender, can't be housed, except for if you were to go to the likes of HomeFacts, there's just shy of 10,000 registered sex offenders across Colorado. All but 497 have their address published. Another way of looking at that would be saying 9,500 of them have what published? Which means they are so then it must be a credit issue, but it's not really a credit issue. There's about 3.7% of people in Colorado who live with a serious mental illness. And if you're not familiar with this idea of serious mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major depression, those are the big ones. And often, especially like the Hollywoodization of homelessness, it is that old man or old woman pushing the cart around, having hallucinations, talking to themselves remarkably unwell, yes? What if I told you that almost 60% of people across the entire state who live with a serious mental illness receive no treatment or counseling for their mental illness? Only 28% of those living with serious mental illness between ages 21 and 64 are employed. So most people with a serious mental illness across the state are more likely to be housed than they are to be homeless, including those that receive no treatment or counseling, and including the vast majority that don't even participate in the labor force. So do we really need to cure people's mental illness for them to be successful in housing? No. We have a ton of people across the state where we could learn about how they live with a mental illness and continue to maintain their housing and not be homeless. Just over 329,000 people in Colorado aged 12 or older have an addiction or dependence on alcohol, and about 128,000 have an addiction or dependence on other drugs. 89% of all people in Colorado with an addiction or dependence to alcohol receive no treatment. We'll just round that up. 9 out of 10 people in Colorado who have an addiction or dependence on alcohol receive no treatment whatsoever, who are alcoholics. So if you were to actually demand or expect sobriety as a precondition for housing success, would that be worthy of doing? No. Because almost everybody who has an addiction or dependence on alcohol is housed and gets no treatment. %84 of all people in Colorado with an addiction or dependence on other drugs receives no treatment. So why on earth would we ever expect homeless or housing programs to have an expectation of sobriety? Makes no sense. Just doesn't add up with the data. And even if we were to send someone to treatment, The most dominant form of treatment that we send people who are experiencing homelessness to, people of low income, although it crosses all income categories, we say you should go to Alcoholics Anonymous. I wouldn't be surprised if I found homeless service organizations throughout all of northern Colorado where they continue to offer that as one of the pillars of the services you get access to. Does anybody know the long-term effectiveness rate of Alcoholics Anonymous? 8%. So Alcoholics Anonymous fails 9 out of 10 times. And yet, what do we tell people to do? Go to AA. Heck, you'll even find judges that as a condition of sentencing say, we're going to release you on condition that you go to. And if someone doesn't succeed in AA, we usually blame the person, not the actual program. We say the issue is that you're not trying the steps hard enough. And if you just try the steps hard enough, you'll succeed. That's like saying to a cancer treatment patient that the issue isn't the actual treatment, the chemo that we're giving you. The issue is that you're not trying the chemo hard enough. And if you just tried that chemo a little harder, you would succeed. So I want to demonstrate how the homeless service delivery system is supposed to work. So let's say I went out and I found 7 people or 7 families experiencing homelessness right now. The first thing that I would have to realize is that they are not a homogeneous group. Or another way of saying it, there's more difference than there is sameness. Now, why does that become important, even for those of you who don't do homeless services day in, day out? Is because we design our programs based upon things that people have in common, not the actual diversity within them. So for example, we say we have a program for families experiencing homelessness. But as soon as you start working with the families, you realize no 2 families are the same. Or you say, we have a program for youth experiencing homelessness. You start serving the youth, they're not the same. Or a program for people living with mental illness who experience homelessness, and you realize that they're not the same. And so once you start digging in and realize that they're not all the same, but our funding was designed based upon sameness, not about difference, we have to have some way as a community of funneling that all down, funneling that information down, so we can really start to figure out what is the depth of need of that person or that family, and how do we get the right person to the right intervention in the right order. Now, historically, homeless programs and services are predicated on this idea of first come, first served. Now, the other thing that becomes really difficult in dealing with that is that homelessness has a longitudinal bias. All that really means is the longer you've been homeless or the more you've been homeless, the better you are at being homeless. You know where all the services are, you know what's expected of you, you know what answers to give, you'll get that outcome. But imagine if we rethought not based upon first come, first served, but based upon depth of need. The sort of experience you might have if you were ill or injured and went to the emergency room of a hospital. And what would that do in terms of reframing our thinking and what it is we are actually going to do related to homelessness? Let me give you an example. Let us say, for example, sure your name is? Tom, all right? So Tom, you had a heart attack this morning. Sorry about that. Good news, Tom, I was there for you, and I rushed you to the hospital. I'm going to give you 2 choices, Tom. Pay attention. Cardiologist or gynecologist? Which one are you going with?
I'll take the cardiologist.
Cardiologist, really good choice, Tom. Now, why would Tom want a cardiologist? Because the cardiologist has the most experience, expertise, most training in matters of the heart. Now, are cardiologists successful 100% of the time, Tom?
No.
No. So it's possible that you could see a cardiologist and still perish, but we like to think that the statistical probability of your recovery has gone up if you've seen the cardiologist. So we're playing the odds on this one. All right. Now, I want to ask you a few more questions, Tom, not to put you too much on the spot, but you did decide to sit nice and close. Okay. I don't need to know any details, but have you ever been to an emergency room at any point in your life?
Yes.
Okay, so Tom has the experience of having gone to an emergency room. If you went to an emergency room because you had a heart attack, would they make you step on a scale first to see just how overweight you are? Would there ever be a circumstance, Tom, where they say, I'd like to help you with your heart, but being overweight is bad for heart health, so tell you what, we'll help you out with your heart soon as you lose 18 pounds. Would they do that to you? No. Let's say, Tom, again, this is all hypothetical. Let's say you were a smoker. I mean, the Surgeon General's been clear on this one, am I right? Smoking is bad for the heart. Would they ever say to you, Tom, we'd like to help you out with your heart attack, but you got to quit smoking and prove to us you've been smoke-free for 90 days. If you go through our smoking cessation program successfully, you're smoke-free for 90 days, then we'll help you with your heart attack. Would we do that to you? No. Let's say, and this is just because of the pain in your chest, Tom, but let's say you dropped an F-bomb or two in the emergency room. Would they kick you out or still serve you?
Still serve.
Still serve you, okay. Let's go a little bit deeper, Tom. Once upon a time, you killed a man. You served your time, you've been out for 10 years. Would we help you with a heart attack, or would this be our moment where we say, you know what, eye for an eye, Tom?
They still help.
Still help you, okay. I know. What if it's your fourth heart attack? Would we still help you? We'd say, listen, buddy, you've had 3 chances. Look at all these other people who are not helping out because you keep having a heart attack. Would we do that to you? No. So just, you would have us believe that you could be an overweight smoking jerk who drops the F-bomb, once killed a man, having his 4th heart attack, and we should still help you. And I'll bet most of you would be in the same position. You want Tom to get help, am I right? Yep. In other words, you're not judging the decisions that Tom has made. You're not judging the lifestyle that Tom leads. You're just basically saying, I want Tom to be alive. And we're going to give it the best shot we possibly can. Right, Tom? All right, hang tight, buddy. You're stable. You're not out of the woods. But you are stable. All right, sir, your name is?
Glenn.
Glenn. Glenn was out salsa dancing last night. It was Sunday. That's what Glenn does on Sunday nights. Who doesn't love some Sunday night salsa? Why watch football when you can be salsa dancing? But your partner, not so fleet of foot, and you were to position your foot right in the position where their foot was not supposed to be, their foot was there, you stubbed your toe. It hurt. You said some of the things that Tom said, but he had pain in his chest, you had pain in the toe. Things that make me blush if I had to repeat them. So I won't. So Glenn, you went to the hospital, you ended up at my triage desk. Now, you don't have to be a doctor to answer this question. Is there anything I can do for a broken or stubbed toe? No. Now, I can empathize. Ooh, that must hurt. But Glenn is not satisfied with that answer. Glenn wants me to know that he has really good insurance. He wants the orthopedic specialist of Northern Colorado to show up stat to take a look at his toe. Should I give in and do that for him? No. Glenn wants me to know that his best friend's daughter, second cousin, once dated the daughter of the chairperson of the hospital board. Don't make me call them. Should I give Glenn super service because of that? Glenn is threatening to bring the media down here to show everybody how nobody gets good health care anymore when they show up in Northern Colorado hospitals. Should that be enough to get me to do something? No. That was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and Glenn is still here. That's a problem. And then you are? Jessica. It's a gift to have. I can pick the hidden talents that people have in a room. So Jessica gets up every morning, runs 6 miles before she goes to work. Right? Healthy and fit. I want to live forever. She finishes her run. She's, sort of person she believes in only organic, non-GMO, unicorn fertilized fruits and vegetables. Hauls out a nice Colorado grapefruit from Mexico. Puts that sharp knife on that round object, and it slips. Cuts you right down to the bone of your finger. You know that sound that metal makes when it scrapes against bone or cartilage? Okay, everybody who just made that face or sound, know the rest of you have homework. Tonight, just grab a knife, find some bone, scrape it against each other. Now, Jessica, of course you're going to go to the hospital, right? I mean, you can see your bone. You show up to my triage station. I have to figure out, is she ill or injured? I think we could all answer yes to that one. Is she ill or injured in such a way that she needs medical attention? I think we could all agree yes. You slice your finger down the bone, you've come to the right place. And then we have to figure out how ill or injured is she compared to everybody else who's trying to get treatment right now. All right, so Glad, that was like 2 o'clock in the morning. Jessica, that was like 6:30 this morning. And my buddy Tom shows up right now having the heart attack. Who gets served first? Are you sure? I mean, I probably didn't emphasize this enough. Glenn's really annoying. But he's not even taking care of his heart attack. I mean, it's number 4. I mean, shouldn't we at least give Jessica a chance? I mean, she like runs 6 miles every day. I mean, she's going to live forever. Tom is just Tom. No, you're right? You would all agree that Tom gets served first. And if we just had this 3, then Jessica, then Glenn, right? That would be the correct order of things. And just after we got him stable, Jessica, you're looking around at every other person who's ill or injured, and you've totally figured out that you're next. Ain't nobody more ill or injured than you are. And just at that moment, Mike shows up with an axe stuck in his head. I mean, who really lives with an axe stuck in their head? Nobody. So Jessica's starting to self-advocate, right? You know what? Fix my finger. Harvest Mike's organs. Everybody's happy. Besides, Tom needs a new heart. Now, if we think about systems of care and triaging, the most ill or injured get the most attention first, regardless of whether or not you see them as being worthy. And homeless systems of care, if we really follow the evidence, has to use the exact same approach. That it's not first come, first served. It's how do I actually get the person or the family to the right program in the right order based upon their specific needs. So if I were to take my 7 people an hour to order them up, I would say that there's a whole bunch of them that are like Glenn. They actually have lower acuity. They might want all sorts of really fancy things, but the best thing I can do is give them the lightest touch possible. If we were to think about emergency shelters, it's entirely possible for homeless shelters to fall within that camp. If people have nowhere else to go, by all means, let's give them a safe, stable place to live. But let's not over-program them. Let's not try to heal or fix them. Let's just try to give them the shortest possible stay and get them back out again. Much like Glenn, the shorter he stays in my emergency room, the better off he's going to be, and the better off my emergency room is going to be. Because he's a hole. Some people are going to be like Jessica, where they're going to need some sort of time-limited attention. When you heard talk of rapid rehousing this morning, this is essentially the story of rapid rehousing. We'll provide you some financial means, maybe to help out with deposit, maybe to help out with other emerging financial issues. It has a certain period of time attached to it, but the best thing I can do is get you on your way. Like the worst thing would happen with Jessica, in medical terms, is we decide that we need to like make her an inpatient in the hospital and keep her around as long as possible until that finger heals. No, we like do everything we need to do. We staple you or sew you or glue you back together, and we send you out on your way and tell you how to take care of it. And if it turns out that it's not working, come back and see us, but the best thing that can happen is you go on your way and live your life without me being interfering. Very few people are going to be like Tom in the homeless service world, that they require permanent supportive housing. They require the most intensive resources we got. And I want to be really clear that Tom is not cheap. It's going to cost a lot of money for us to be successful with Tom. But I'm also going to tell you this, I'm going to prove you this just in the little bit of time we have today, that it is less expensive for me to treat and care for Tom than it is to leave him on his own. Here's one of the remarkable things about homelessness. I can go at it from the moral argument or the financial argument. It is cheaper to end homelessness than it is to manage homelessness. Always. So even if the person that we're trying to house in homelessness is a foul-mouthed user of lots of substances, who has a long history of incarceration, who's been very problematic for business owners, who's used every service in town, it will be cheaper for you to house and support that person than it will be to try to rehabilitate them or criminalize their way out of it. Is that an alarm of some sort that I need to be concerned with? Should we be vacating? No. The answer is no, we're not vacating. All right. Sounds like a really safe plan in a room full of people with one exit. So what we need to do is we need to radically transform how we respond to and fund complex social issues. And for those of you in the room who don't do this every day, I'm going to try to put this in a more theoretical bent for you, but to help you understand that the common ideas that we have about homelessness are bunk, right? So people don't actually choose to be homeless. Study after study debunks this over and over and over again. If you get to the root core, it might turn out to 2 out of 100 people who are actually making the choice to be homeless, might be 2. But this overwhelming sentiment that people are choosing this lifestyle, what people are rejecting is often the array of services and the rules that come with those services, not the services themselves. Right? The sort of thing where I said, you know, Tom, we're going to serve you with your heart attack so long as you're smoke-free, you're a nice guy, you never swear, and you can prove to us that you've really become rehabilitated during your time in jail. And oh, by the way, you have to be with us every single night by 6 p.m. And if you do even one thing where you look at staff the wrong way, we're going to kick you back out again. You're on your own for your heart attack. I think we'd all agree that Tom actually wants a healthy heart. He just doesn't want all the rules that come with it. People need to hit rock bottom. I can tell you that there's no clinical definition of rock bottom, but this idea that we can't serve people until they get to a place where their life is completely miserable is myth. It's a Hollywoodization of any social issue. The shelters need to provide a lot of programming. That the best thing we can do in shelters is invest in things like life skills training and employment development and budgeting classes, all complete garbage. The fewer programs you have in shelters, the better the shelter is, not the more programming you have within it. There's absolutely no need to achieve sobriety to be ready for housing. What we need to do is teach and support people how to be housed and use substances, not how to stop using substances in order to be housed. People that actually don't need to take their meds or be in therapy related to their mental illness. I already showed you that most people in Colorado with a serious mental illness receive no treatment or counseling and they're housed. And that we have to really let go of this idea of transitional housing or step-up programs that get people ready for permanent housing. People need to prove that they're ready for housing is absolutely wrong. The only 2 conditions under which you should ever be served by a homeless serving program, you're homeless and you're breathing. That's it. Those are the only 2 qualifications. So how do we normally do this? And again, not just with homelessness, any complex social issue. Well, the most dominant way in which we, as organizations and communities, leaders, whether that's through private philanthropy, through United Way, through funding mechanisms, through government, is our starting position is almost always charity. In the history of humankind, charity has never solved a complex social issue. It can't. It's not designed to. Does charity have a place? Absolutely. I mean, even if we were to look at like Hurricane Harvey and Irma recently, the first wave of response to people in need is charity. Let's get them drinkable water. Let's get them access to food. Is that going to solve the issues that are actually happening with the place that they were dwelling before the disasters actually hit? No. When it comes to homeless services, charity kills people. There are, to the best of my knowledge, and I travel about 280 days a year, no instances where a person who is homeless has died of starvation. One of the charitable responses that we'll see for homelessness, the community will get together, the weather's going to start to get colder, people say, we need more places for people to come inside in the winter. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Weather does not crack the top 10 reasons why people who are homeless die. You know what the number 1 killer is of people who are homeless? Cardiovascular disease. You know what number 2 is? Cancer. You know what number 3 is? I could do this all day. But the charity response is that we have to get it in there and make sure people actually have extra places to stay rather than solving. I'll give you examples of charity, not related to homelessness, food security. Do you want people in your community to have enough to eat? I'm sure you do. I'm sure you don't want anybody to go hungry where you live. So we have like food banks and food kitchens, and we have charitable food giving. Does that actually solve the reason why people are hungry? No, the reason why people are hungry is we don't have a livable wage. That's it in a nutshell. Whether that's through income support programs or through minimum wage, people actually can't afford to buy food that would allow them to be secure. But rather than address that issue, we have corporations who do food drives. We have complete companies that do food drives. We have schools and sports teams that do food drives. And now we need more warehouses to store the food and more trucks to transport the food. And we need more rules for how people access the food. It becomes an entity unto itself. It's a solvable problem. But we don't actually solve it with the right things, we solve it with charity. It's been proven time and again, charity has more benefit for the giver than the receiver. I mean, not far from now, it'll be Thanksgiving. And I'll bet you there'll be no shortage of faith-based organizations, businesses, and school groups who's like, you know what we need to do? We need to put on a turkey dinner for people who are homeless. Because everybody deserves turkey. So in some work that we did in Rhode Island, we calculated if we put on all an investment, it worked out to about $64,000 worth of investment to put on turkey dinners for people who are homeless across Rhode Island. I mean, Rhode Island's a pretty small state. You know how many people you could have housed that had no income for $64,000? Turkey isn't going to end homelessness. Turkey's an event that overwhelms you with tryptophan. Though if you want just a little nerdy side bit, Swiss cheese has more tryptophan than turkey. So if you really want a nap, have a turkey and Swiss sandwich, if you know what I'm saying. And following Thanksgiving, not long after that will be Christmas, and I'll bet there'll be a whole bunch of really well-intentioned people who's like, we need to do Toys for Tots. What we need to do, we need to sponsor a family and give them all sorts of material goods for one day. Imagine if your efforts went actually into solving why they needed that charity in the first place. But that's asking too much, perhaps. In homeless services, there's a place for sheltering. But if your entire response is sheltering, all you're doing is using a charitable response to homelessness. You're not actually solving the issue of access to housing, you're expanding the actual charitable resource. If we think back to my example with everybody coming to my emergency room, I can either figure out how to have greater flow through in my emergency room and get more resources and doctors to allow that to happen, or I could expand my waiting area. I think we'd all agree we'd much rather have a more rapid throughput than a bigger waiting area. Now, up from charity, the most dominant approach is bureaucratic responding. That's what happens when government gets involved. Now, most government intervention isn't direct intervention. Most government intervention is part of the largest privatization we've ever seen in this country, which is government gives money to nonprofits who, for next to no money and the inability to pay their own staff a living wage, does the work of providing a social safety net. But all of that comes with rules, and most of the rules are essentially distinguishing between a deserving and undeserving poor. So you deserve to have services if you do A, B, and C. You can't have services if you do X, Y, or Z. Or we put time limits on it, or we put financial constraints on it. Now, all of that is intended to protect the taxpayer. I get that, but the lack of flexibility that comes with it means that there's all sorts of people who do not become really well served. Now, neither charity nor bureaucratic responding do one of the most critical things that are necessary to actually put in place radical change in any sort of complex social issue. It's a really crazy idea. It says, what if we actually started not with those things, but actually assessing what people needed and delivering what they needed? This is where it's a slam dunk, easy answer when it comes to homelessness. Because I can assure you, now I get paid a lot of money to tell people this, so write this one down. that there's only one known cure to homelessness: housing. You're either housed or you're not housed. There's really nothing in between. So what do people who are homeless need? Housing. Huh? So what they don't need? Drug treatment, budgeting classes, life skills, parenting programs, social engagements, turkey dinners, or toys for tots. What they need is the one and only solution to their homelessness. Now, you can apply this in lots of different parts of complex social issues. Let's use unemployment as an example, because there's lots of really well-intentioned programs that try to help people re-enter the labor force, yes? So it turns out that the only cure to unemployment is a job. Did you know that? Not job readiness programs, actual JOBs. So either we're focused on providing the solution or we're not. Now, charitable responses and bureaucratic responses have tons of social control written into them. Change who you are, so I give you what you need. Needs assessment says, I totally accept who you are, and I'm going to work with who you are rather than trying to transform who you are so I can give you resources. And if we do that really well, then people have the ability to develop community. So when people ask me, well, what is the difference then, Iain? If it's not about economic poverty, if it's not about substance use, if it's not about bad credit or evictions on record, if it's not about those issues, why do some people become homeless and some don't? And the answer is community. If you had a housing instability crisis today, and I don't wish that on any of you, but if you did, I'll bet that your first response is family and friends. Your first response is not to go to a government office or to a nonprofit organization. You lean on family and friends. You lean on community. And by extension, maybe part of that community extends into the place where you worship, maybe extends into people that you socialize with, you know, your card-playing friends, your bowling friends, or whatever, but you rely upon community. If you have no community to rely on, then you rely upon the system. And once you get into the system, then you learn to only rely on the system. If I were to go to any place where people who are chronically homeless are found, anywhere in northern Colorado, I can assure you the chronically homeless people hang out with other chronically homeless people. Why? Because they hang out with people who are just like them in the same way that you hang out with people who are just like you. What happens with the people that we serve is if they stay homeless long enough, because we weren't actually addressing their needs, they really struggle to get to a place where they have rich, vibrant communities that will be a social safety net. Heck, there'll be a safety trampoline that bounce them right back. Instead, they become more ingrained. They don't just start being in a position where they're surviving homelessness, they'll thrive within homelessness. And what we really need people to achieve is personal advocacy, which is what you have. You decide what time you're going to bed. You're not going to bed when someone else tells you it's curfew. You decide what you're going to eat. If you're a person who's relying upon charitable food giving, you eat what's given to you. You decide the clothes that you're going to wear. You don't rely upon someone having like a clothes closet where you can get hand-me-downs. You have personal advocacy. If our programs do the things that they're supposed to do, we start with needs assessment, we build community, and we empower people to have personal advocacy. All right. So why don't we do this? Primarily because funders, government departments, and especially nonprofits are really good at maintaining what they've already got. So if I were to say, here's all the things you could do to end homelessness, the most common response is, here's all the money I would need in order to do that. And it would most always be an ask for more monies. But really the question is, how do you use what you have differently rather than asking for more? And this is where the analogy of the old growth forest works. If you've never seen an old growth forest, pretty remarkable place. But if you've ever seen an aerial view of an old-growth forest, all you see is the lushness of the trees. If you're on the floor of an old-growth forest, it's a pretty dark, shaded place. And there's no new growth happening. Why? Because all those old established trees, they block out the sunlight and they take all the nutrients, they take all the resources. The last thing an old, well-established tree wants is a new tree trying to steal some of its nutrients or sunlight. What's the last thing an organization wants if it's been working on homelessness for 10, 20, 30 years? Is doing something differently. Some organizations have worked at great lengths to build an empire. They're a brand name. When it comes to those times of charitable giving, usually related in the period between Thanksgiving and Christmas, people know who they are. People are happy to give them some Christmas guilt money. Feel better about themselves. Those organizations have gone to great lengths in most instances to construct a narrative of their awesomeness that actually isn't built upon data or evidence. But if you radically want to change the way that you respond to homelessness, if you want to actually focus on ending homelessness, you have to move from a few projects to do this work to functioning as a system, which means you're going to need some creative destruction. You're going to need to tear some stuff down. And ultimately, the question you have to be asking yourself as a community of leaders, is this organization solving people's homelessness? In other words, getting them into housing. Or are they managing homelessness? And if they're just managing homelessness and not solving homelessness, blow it up. Get rid of it. Not a good use of resources. To free up that money that was already there to do something different. And for a period of time after that, it feels really uncomfortable. People do not like renewal and reorganization because they would much rather go back to how things were before. And as soon as people feel uncomfortable, a new habit formation hasn't worked in. I mean, everything we know about the psychology of change is, I may have hated what I was doing, but at least I want to work with what's familiar. You put me in the place of unfamiliar, and I'd rather go back to what I know, even though I acknowledge it wasn't working. And so you have to last for a period of time as a community until you get to the place where rebirth is really achieved. That things are fundamentally different than how they were before. Most communities that have made the greatest gains in ending homelessness know that that takes 18 to 24 months to tear down what was there, to strategically alter the investment across private philanthropy and government, to train up nonprofit organizations to do things differently, to identify what is that population group that we want to be serving, not just the ones who are showing up to being served, and to make the difficult decisions as a system of care. In other words, it doesn't happen overnight. And it needs champions. And it needs champions and it needs leadership, not just from within the sector, but from outside the sector. We need those individuals who are willing to stand up to say, this is what's right to achieve results in our community. Because homelessness is a very rare occurrence. If we acknowledge this remarkably rare, that the things that we think it is aren't really the things it is, and then we'll start to get to a place where we say homelessness is not a punishment, housing is not a reward. So it means that we as a community will actually be able to be in a position where we say, hey, look, come on. Passion is not synonymous with performance. So just because you care doesn't mean you should get money. Can you imagine if you're investing in a business and they're like, they are the nicest people and they try hard every single day. They always are operating in a loss, but I like them so much, I can't wait to give them more money as an investor. Would you ever do that? So you need to take the same sort of approach to investing in homeless services. What is the output and outcome that I expect, and let me invest in it. Being really good people is not good reason for you to get money. Being really good people and getting really good results is. We got to move out of stories of hunches and anecdotes. We have to stop using sample sizes of one. We have to start looking at the cumulative impact of the data. And we actually have to say that we are in the business of doing really quality services as opposed to a quantity of services. It's not how many people who are homeless that you serve, it's how much homelessness you end. I love Catherine Schultz. Great TED Talk. Even better job title. Catherine Schultz is a self-proclaimed wrongologist. And I believe this to be true, that the miracle of our mind isn't that we see the world as it is that we can see the world as it isn't. And if we see how so many homeless programs and services work, how so many government expectations work, how so much investment from philanthropy works, we're actually not investing in evidence, we're investing in things that aren't actually true. Let me give you an example. I worked really hard on creating this thing called the measure of badness. Okay. So we have all sorts of people who are receiving services. They are denoted by these purple stars here. And as you might expect, some of them have life that's really bad and some of them have life that's not really that bad. And they go along a distribution. And because it's a bell curve, we can say that it is what kind of distribution? Thank you, normal distribution. Thanks for all being awake on a Monday morning. All right, so there's just as many people going to be on either side of this. So what does an organization do if they work in the realm of homelessness? Well, again, let's fast forward. It's Thanksgiving time, and the media is looking to do a story about homelessness for the holidays. And you're thinking, especially if you work in services, fantastic. Because if there's one thing we know in the nonprofit world related to human services, is that the overwhelming majority of income through donation happens in the last quarter of the year. So they want a story. Okay, I got a story. So what am I going to do? Instead of saying, here's what the average typical person is, or if they're actually meeting with you for funding, they don't take the average person who's served by the program, or if they're meeting with the board, they don't take the average person, or if they're trying to convince the police to change some policy related to it, they don't take the average person. If they're trying to get better access to some other community resource, they don't take the average person. No, they take the person where life is bad. And they want you to believe that because of their services, everybody where their life is bad, that they're able to get them all the way over here where life ain't bad. And that is such a load of crap. I mean, that's a good story. We love that, but that's not normal. That's a lie. I mean, perhaps the real story is we took a whole bunch of people where life was bad, and you know what? We got them just to the other side of life not being that bad. So, are one of their kids still in care? Yes, but they have visitation now. Are they still really poor? You know it. And they're no longer swiping things at Walmart and then returning them to Walmart. They've gone from performing sex work 2 times a week to maybe once a month. But you don't want to tell this truth. So you tried to tell the story of miracles. If we take a much more realistic view, if I was an investor, it's okay, so how do you get people from life is bad to life is just on the other side of ain't bad? And I would look at 3 performance metrics, which just happen to be the same performance metrics that HUD puts out. So if you want to say, what are the measures that I would look at related to my investment? This is what you want to look at. Number 1. How long are people homeless? And I'll give you a tip on what the right answer is. The shorter they are homeless, the better the program. So whether you want to look at mean, median, motor range, the fewer days people are homeless or a family is homeless, the better off they are. Now, are there going to be some individuals and families that have really complex issues and needs going on in their life? Absolutely. Absolutely. And we will get them out of homelessness fast and then support them in housing rather than trying to take care of all those needs so that they can move into housing. So the second thing you're going to look at, the bottom line of a homeless service organization, how many people move into permanent housing? Well, that sounds pretty good. Stay homeless a short period of time and get a lot of people into permanent housing. And of those that moved into permanent housing, how many came back to homelessness? That should also be a small number. If I was looking to engage from a leadership or investment perspective of the homeless service organization, I would not want to know what are all the programs and things you do that are busy. What I would want to know is, how do you make sure people have short lengths of stay? How do you make sure those people are moving into permanent housing? And how are you making sure those people don't come back? If I was looking at this from an existing resource perspective, I would be asking myself, what's the creative destruction I need to put in place that would allow that to happen? What things are we doing or investing in right now that aren't related to that we need to blow up so that that becomes possible? So what works? Well, housing first is irrefutable. Now, a couple of words about housing first. Some of it was in the introductory remarks. But for something to be housing first, it means that there's no expectation of compliance. So you don't have to see a doctor or see a psychiatrist. You don't have to take your meds. There's no expectation of sobriety. So you don't have to be sober or even promising that you're going to work on sobriety or going through detox or treatment first. No expectation. You don't have to graduate from a program to get housing first. So you don't have to demonstrate that you did okay within such and such a transitional place to have access to housing first. And you also don't have to have an income to have housing first. So we'll get you housed, then we'll figure out the income rather than figuring out the income for you to move into housing. And the last thing I want to be really clear about, housing first does not require that you're nice. Don't have to be nice to get housing first. Now, by saying it's irrefutable, what I'm going to say is from an evidentiary perspective, because I'm a skeptical empiricist, I'm a nerd. I know people struggle when they look at this temple of awesomeness to believe that that's true, but I am. I'm very, very nerdy. So housing first is not just a philosophy, it's an intervention. And the peer-reviewed published literature would show you that there's 3 approaches and only 3 approaches to delivering housing first. So you're either delivering one of the 3 approaches or you're not. But if you deliver one of those interventions, then we know the following to be true and irrefutable. Number 1, every $10 invested in housing first results in savings of $21.72. So imagine we're going to Vegas, and I said every time you laid out 10, they're going to pay you back $21.72. Would you take that? Even if you were like totally against gambling, you'd be like, this is for income generation, this isn't gambling. This is no different than making an investment in the stock market, but knowing I'm going to get a certain return. No, 10 gets you $21.72. So all housing first programs that have ever been studied from a peer review perspective have cost savings. The most robust longitudinal shows $21.72 in savings. Where do those savings come from? Those savings come from savings to the homeless service delivery system, in healthcare, and policing. Those are the 3 major cost savings related to housing first. So imagine being in a position where you said, okay, we're going to start focusing on solving the issue, not managing the issue, and our community is going to save money in the process. Number 2. Considerable decreases in cessation and use of alcohol and other substances. So this is proven. If I want to be in a position where I'm assisting an individual to reduce or stop using alcohol or meth, heroin, crack, name your drug of choice, the people are more likely to be successful in decreasing or stopping their use if they have stable housing first. You can find that published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, which, if you're not familiar with academia, is the gold standard of publications. You can find evidence of that published in the Journal of Addictive Behaviors. You can find that published related to some work called What is Housing First and Its Impacts. You can find that if you were to look at 1811 Eastlake, which is in Seattle, Washington, where not only do they make it a condition of access that you were a chronic alcoholic, they said, we will even make sure you have access to free beer if you need it, taxpayer funded, so that you don't leave the housing so long as you don't disturb the community. We'd much rather do that. And even when people have access to free beer, they're more likely to decrease or stop using if we focus on housing first. Crazy, I know. Consistently, more than 80% of households stay housed when the interventions are applied. If the intervention is not applied, if we talk about traditional linear approaches to residential access, they run about 47% success over the long term. Longitudinally, so when we start looking 2-5 years out with housing first, you still see more than 4 out of 5 people housed. Again, their other life issues are still likely to be there, but they're not homeless. You also see much improved health and social outcomes. So if people had chronic illness, they're more likely to be able to manage their chronic illness. They're no longer, from a social perspective, hanging out with other people who have behaviors that are problematic to communities at large. When it comes to sheltering, it means that we need shelters that are low barrier, not high barrier. For those of you who don't do direct service, all that really means is make it as easy as possible for people to get into shelter without having rules that keep people out of shelter. That's what it means in a nutshell. It doesn't mean chaos, doesn't mean anything goes. But if you think about and just about every community has that one person or group of people that's like, they seem so hardened and emboldened and entrenched in their homelessness, ask yourself, what will we need to change in our shelter to let that person in? It means that our shelters have an unrelenting housing focused and unapologetically so. So that we start to see shelters as a process, not as a destination. Shelters are the place by which people have rapid throughput to housing again. They are not a holding ground waiting for housing. They're not a dumping ground for other systems. Housing-focused shelters, for example, reject the notion that people can be discharged from hospitals or mental health institutions or corrections directly into a shelter, but rather says those other systems have a responsibility in making sure people actually have stable alternatives upon exit. 3, that they have the option for the people who want to actually end their homelessness, not a dumping ground, I just talked about that. Devoid of any program that does not have an evidence base or direct link to housing access. So there's no longer computer programs in shelter or life skills programs or budgeting programs or anything like that. That's all gone. And it's replaced with an unrelenting focus on having people move into housing. Because what do we actually know about shelter stays? We know the majority of people, and this is true every time these studies are replaced, whether it's the original Springer and Mars study or the Culhane study, majority of people who use shelters use them for a short period of time. Most of the time it does exactly what it's supposed to do. But when it doesn't, when we do have people who are staying for a longer period of time, and that's about 20% of people, what do we know about that? Well, in general, households with long stays are no more likely than households with short stays to have intensive behavioral health treatment histories, to be disabled, or to be unemployed. So we think you stay longer if you're more messed up. Simply not true. So why do people tend to be in a position where they stay longer? Well, Culhane's research suggests that people are more likely to stay longer because of the actual policies and programs of the shelter, not the characteristics of the people. So if I was trying to change this from a leadership perspective or a funding perspective, I wouldn't be asking about what do people need to do differently in receiving shelters. I would be asking what do shelter providers need to do differently for the people. In terms of our outreach programs, we want to see a resolution of homelessness, not just meeting basic needs. So if we have outreach workers going to different parts of the community, it's no longer about soup and sandwiches and coffee. It's about how do I end your homelessness directly from living under the bridge or living in the woods or living in an abandoned building. It's about having an unrelenting housing focus on all that we do. It is about making sure that we have professionals doing outreach. Usually they're treated as entry-level positions. We need to rethink that. And we need to be in a position where we are targeting those with the deepest needs first. Outreach generally will fall into one of two categories. I would suggest that communities need to figure out how to get their resources and have the leadership assigned to do approach 2, not approach 1. Approach 1 is all about being seen. Approach 2 is all about solving homelessness. Approach 1 is really good for meeting those immediate basic needs and keep people alive and responding to crisis, especially when that elected official's office has got a call about somebody who's homeless outside and we want to send someone stat. And approach 2 is really good at actually solving the problems and getting there to a place of housing resolution. Approach 1 is when you use lower skilled, entry-level, low-paid staff. Approach 2, actually investing in professionals who know how to work with someone with co-occurring serious mental illness and a substance use disorder and a brain injury, and they've been homeless for 8 years, and they have tons of things on their record that are problematic for getting in the house, and saying, you know how to solve this. And having a place where they actually have the right size caseloads to achieve the results that we need them to achieve. I've been to enough places, I can actually tell you something that's going to sound remarkably weird. Ending homelessness is easy if you have the guts to do the right thing as a community. And that comes down to making decisions about what it is we actually want to achieve. And when it comes to outreach, saying, if we want to look busy, we do one thing. If we actually want to solve this, we do something else. So that's it's like an hour of the greatest hits. We have a few minutes to take any questions you might have. Or I've done such a spectacular job that, of course, there's... All right, we'll go here first, and I'm going to repeat the question just so everybody can hear it.
So you've seen some communities be successful.
I have seen some communities be successful, yes.
And one of those is probably changing the charity mindset.
Changing the charity mindset is definitely important for getting communities to be successful.
How do they do that?
Well, how do they do that? So it often starts with, I will say, the organized charitable giving. So whether that is through corporate giving or large organizations, especially are engaged with faith-based organizations to deliver services, and it's usually a leadership roundtable, which requires some people from the likes of a United Way and some people like in the finance, banking, kind of professional business industries and others to start spearheading or leading a group of people who want to actually talk about targeted philanthropy and investment and change. Those individuals at the leadership level start to establish some principles that they want to have happen. So we don't want there to stop being an investment. What do we want people to know what they're investing in? And how do we get the thing through the investment and mindset? So, for example, historically, part of the messaging might be, for every $3 you give, here's how many people get lunch today, right? Well, now we want to be able to say, and for this amount of money, here's how many people move out of homelessness and are never going to need a home service again in their life. So really focus on solution-based messaging, I think becomes really important. And if you have that leadership group, then they can start to put the tentacles out to make the long-lasting change in different parts of the system. I'm not so naive as to think that everybody gives up and stops giving to some of their favorite pet causes. But once you start actually having a resounding impact of your solution-based investment, then it becomes harder to justify why a charitable-based response that's not connected to the system of what we're trying to achieve. Especially if some of the charitable giving is making it more difficult to achieve results in ending homelessness. There was a question here.
Yeah, at the beginning you talked a little bit about the amount of housing, and no amount of housing solves homelessness.
Yeah, no amount of housing solves homelessness. I did say that, yes.
Can you just bring us a few, well, we'll allow it to but bring it back to a circle?
So it turns out that most people are remarkably innovative at figuring out their housing needs. That's the truth of it. And I think part of why we struggle, especially at this kind of leadership level of thinking through housing, is, and I've been homeless and I've been really poor in my life, my orientation is still towards what could I afford at those stages of my life as opposed to what happens now. I mean, I still don't make a lot of money, but my wife is like super foxy and makes a great salary. So, and we have 4 kids, so throw that into the mix. But my orientation is still back to needs-based as opposed to wants-based approach to housing. So if we think about that and we think about how communities work, we tend to say, well, we need things like we need a landlord roundtable or a developer roundtable to talk about affordable housing. And that's great, it has its place, and we're going to come into that, but it begs the question, affordable to whom? Because that's when you get into deserving and undeserving. What would an affordable housing strategy look like where we said we want an X number of units to be available to people with no income? From a developer perspective, that makes 0 sense, right? So we're going to need there to be a completely different approach. But what we seldom don't do is use boots on the ground intelligence. What we seldomly don't do is go into really low income communities and not talk to landlords, but talk to tenants. And essentially the question we want to ask tenants in low income communities, especially if it's not government assisted housing, is how did you find a place to live without me? And replicate it. And I mean, I can pretty much assure you, based upon my field experience and research that we've done in other communities, is you quickly find out where is that person with like terrible credit history and tons of evictions on their record, and they're a registered sex offender, and they haven't had a job in 6 years, but they're still, like, where is that person living? And we think that it must be just a bunch of slumlords and crappy housing. No, that there's secondary markets that are non-corporatized in the way that large property management firms are. Communities that have success figure out how to penetrate those realistically through the tenant base, not through the landlord base. So really kind of focusing on that. And if we are going to focus on a development or corporate perspective, then again, moving away from charity to a needs-based approach. I can tell you, as someone who's examined lots of social work curricula, they don't teach real estate in social work school. And then who do we keep asking to go find housing? Social workers who come back and then say there is no. So maybe, just maybe, if you want to find housing, that you find a completely different business model. I would actually look at a business entity that has a history or track record of finding housing. I would give them a base amount, let's say $30,000, $40,000, and then I'd incentivize. You get another $10,000 for every 200 units you find in this price point. And I'm be amazed at how many of those units suddenly show up out of nowhere. Why? Because that's their core business. Stop asking social workers to do something that isn't their core business and then being disappointed that they can't seem to find housing. Yep.
So I spent time in 2 different housing first things, models. And the thing that I think, without thinking we need to provide all the support services, which is what my agency does, but what I found is, yes, drug and alcohol use went down just by putting into the housing. But then I said, well, how long do they live here? Is this for life? And that was when they're not going back to homelessness. They're building the steps to working and
Yeah. So just to paraphrase your comment, because I have a microphone and you don't.
yeah.
So you've had the experience of working in different housing first programs, at least 2 different. And yes, we do get to a place where we can provide lots of supports to people. And yes, when people move in, just by the very fact of moving in, the use of like their alcohol and drugs does go down. But the other remark you made is that, you know, could it be permanent? Yes, but it turns out people move as their life gets more stable. And I think it's no different than how we think about mobility in our own kind of history of housing, right? Is it as you journey through the life cycle, as your size of your household changes, or your household economics change, or your job changes, or the location of your job changes, or even the things you want in a life change, so too might be the place that you live. And people who move into housing first programs move for those exact same reasons. And they don't move back to homelessness. I mean, they, you know, live, I don't know if this room will get it because you're all white, but the Jeffersons. Moving on up to the last chance for questions going once.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. What are your thoughts on right to rest or homeless middle rights public policy options?
So right to rest, or what was the second part?
Well, sometimes it's referred to as homeless middle rights. Some states have passed that type of legislation into law. There have been efforts in Colorado over the last few years. I'm curious to get your take on the value of that and perhaps some of the consequences.
I have seen no value to people experiencing homelessness of having a Bill of Rights. I see it being a huge benefit to advocates, but it doesn't seem to make the life of a person experiencing homelessness any different whatsoever. Last chance for second. Questions going twice. Here it is.
I'd be curious to get your thoughts on transients versus the talk about homelessness.
Transients versus homelessness. Love this question. No, it's a really good one. So I will thank the VA for this and I don't thank the VA for many things, but this is one where I will definitely thank the VA. So they did the most comprehensive study on this notion of mobility and homelessness, which was getting at transients, but also the issue of if you build it, do they come? Right? So communities are like, well, we don't want to be so good at homelessness that like everybody from all the surrounding states start coming to our community. So first of all, there is no like underground wireless system amongst homelessness. You know, it's in Hawaii, they call it coconut wireless, right? It's not like we all like suddenly get on the phone. It's like, oh, Jim, did you hear? You got to get over here from Michigan, man. That's legit in Colorado, right? So that's first fear. It's not going to happen. The second thing this study proved, which is similar to other research that's been done, is that most people who are homeless in any community have had stable housing at some point in the community where they're found to be homeless. So that's also remarkable, and it's the overwhelming majority. Now, depending on where you go in the country, there are rates of true transients, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15%. Which is people that had really no intention of settling down roots, that you are just passing along and there's something interesting and their needs are met and they will move on again. The great news that people are transient is we can still offer them the chance to lay down roots here and be a contributing, vibrant member of our community. As opposed to just saying, well, you say you're moving on, so we're going to do nothing for you. But just remember the first part is that most people who are homeless in your community have been housed at some point in the community where they're found to be homeless. Last chance for questions. Because I got like other training to do and it's like Monday and you're all looking fancy, so I imagine you have some other place you need to be. All right, so thanks to those who brought me here to make this speech to you all and to getting you all here, and they say there's no such thing as a free breakfast, so you got to listen to me. And now for any closing parting words.